Have you ever thought about how race and culture define one's experience about life? Race and culture are commonly confused, but they are two different ideas. However, race goes hand in hand with culture. For example, black is a race, but it is also a culture. With cultures come stereotypes. A stereotype is a preconceived notion about someone based on their appearance, outward actions, or personality traits. One's appearance may be dependent on their culture. Therefore, people are stereotyped because of their culture. This applies to everyone from every culture. The inclusion of stereotypes is evidently common throughout novels. Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison is no exception. The African American narrator is stereotyped when he goes to a restaurant. The waiter who seats him assumes that he wants grits for breakfast because they are a stereotypical African American food. The narrator then tells him coldly that he wants orange juice, toast, and coffee. The narrator was not upset that the waiter offered him grits, but rather upset because he was offended that the waiter just assumes that he wants grits just because they're a cultural black food. The narrator goes out of his way to defy that stereotype by ordering a toast, coffee, and orange juice. He even gives his order with a hostile tone to let the waiter and the readers know that the waiter offended him. The media has an impact on people's perceptions on one another. For example, one may think that they know about a certain topic based on what they have read from history books. However, they do not take into account that history books have bias. Maya Angelou addresses the depiction of African Americans throughout history. She says, quote, "You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise." Usually, one may not question what is written about in history books because they are taught as true facts in schools. However, Angelou, an African American woman, feels that her culture has been demeaned in history. This false information leads to stereotypes and misconceptions.
Not only do whites stereotype African Americans, but throughout history we have seen many instances of discrimination directed towards whites from African Americans. This proves that stereotypes are not limited to just minorities, however, to people of all cultural backgrounds. Many people are still blind to the world of prejudice and discrimination that still affects a large group of people even to this day. Due to the brutal conditions blacks were faced to endure for over a century, they have grown to associate the white race with hatred, prejudice, and injustice. This started to cause a common stereotype of whites amongst blacks. By the early 1900s, a majority of African Americans had experienced slavery and segregation. This commonality led to a familiar stigma of whites within the black culture. The stereotypes blacks have on whites directly relates back to cultural criticism, or the practice of evaluating an entire culture based off of one experience or encounter. Although many people claim that there is no such thing as reverse discrimination, this is simply not the case. Historically, whites have been allowed to view themselves as the standard measure, from which all other races deviate. Recently, people claim that they have no preference for one race over the other, but when we really think about this, whites have not experienced a variety of discrimination. No two cultures have the same idea of what cultural criticism is, expanding the definition to fit all other perspectives. Cultural criticism can be seen throughout the book Four Spirits by Sina Naslund, when characters display a disliking towards the superior race. This novel combines the violent acts of whites and the peaceful protests of blacks during the civil rights movement. It also exemplifies a unique perspective of whites, seeing as though the author herself is white. It is evident that Naslund is inspired by social change and development, as it is a constant theme in Four Spirits. Throughout the novel, it is clear that blacks view whites as a cruel and unjust group of people who will do whatever they want to remain the superior culture. Although I do not agree with the concept of stereotyping an entire group of people based off of one personal experience, I believe African Americans have a justified reason to perceive whites in the way that many do. Throughout history, whites have almost always exhibited themselves as the superior and the dominant race. There have been many cases of prejudice, both intentional and unintentional. Criticism towards one's culture started out as an intentional act of discrimination. However, in more recent times, the idea of stereotyping others has embedded itself so deeply into our mentality that it has almost become second nature.
Okay, so continuing with the topic of cultural criticism, I'm going to be talking about Nat Turner and how he was criticized Styron was criticized rather for being a white author, not portraying the character of Nat Turner, who is black, properly. So the criticisms on the novel I actually used from our Schoology page, and it was about how a lot of black people were really upset with the way that Styron wrote this story. So the article that we read said that Styron had made the book to seem like a parody and, quote, the language combined with the structure of the novel to disastrous effect, end quote. So that is kind of saying that Styron doesn't properly portray a black perspective, and then he also says that Styron writes with white language and white consciousness. So a lot of black writers also find issue with the fact that to avoid using the more casual language that Turner may have used amongst friends, Styron isolates Turner's character to the confines of a novel where he mainly communicates with whites. And he also claims that Styron only focuses on one certain reality, and that also contributes to the reason he cites the story as using cliches, such as when Nat repeatedly uses the word maso when talking to plantation owners, or when he begs to stay on the plantation with his owner instead of being freed. He also, in the criticism, he also declares it to be disappointing because he does see Styron to be of respectable distinction, but he's disappointed with how he fell into step behind past generations of Southern authors who portrayed black men in the way that Styron portrays Will's character as a half-beast. So in terms of personal commentary, I personally understand the frustration because after so many years of fighting for the proper representation, Styron just kind of delved straight back into the misrepresentation of the past. Also with Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's idea of the dangers of a single story, which is basically that it's a sole perspective that is accepted of one group, community, or place with no variation at all, which creates stereotypes and often furthers negative discrimination. So with that idea, I think that the portrayal of Nat Turner in this novel confines many people of black descent to the stereotype of beast-like characters and forces a lot of people to believe that the whiter way of speaking should be the norm. And I also think it's a detriment to readers to be misinformed about the subject of Nat Turner. So that's mainly because if one is to believe that Turner was a man who was firm in his beliefs and strong in his will, then Styron's use of cliche demeaning language when coming from Turner's character is disruptive to that portrayal. And I also think that in terms of historical accuracy, the criticism is right in declaring Styron's isolation of Turner to be unrealistic. I think Turner must have spent more time around other black people than Styron's portrayal suggests, and I think that takes a lot away from the story.
Yourself ever had an instance of cultural criticism?
I myself have never had a direct instance of cultural criticism.
Society needs to do in order to combat cultural criticism.
So to combat cultural criticisms that exist with Chaldeans or any other race among the planet, the person having these criticisms and the person that's being critical needs to just get a tiny glimpse of the people they're being critical about. That could mean experiencing their culture or just getting to know someone, because not long after getting to know someone that they're critical of, whose culture they're critical of, they'll see that that person eats, sleeps, and breathes just the same as they do.
So, have I been treated cruelly in my life? Fortunately, I haven't. But are there like the subtle things?
Like microaggressions?
Well, she got this because she's black. Or, the stereotypes that come with being black. Well, she acts this way
Mhm.
because that's what Black people do.
So, what do you think we as a community, especially at Mercy, can do to combat this kind of tension? And do you think events that we have, like Ethnic Bazaar, can help to diminish ignorance?
I think any type of education helps.
Mhm.
Ethnic Bazaar is wonderful in that it does make the school community aware of the different cultures. I mean, you can see that these different cultures exist, and even though walking in the hall, you can see that, but you see it in a different light. You know, you see a collection of students, and whether they're singing, dancing, karate,
Yeah.
or you know, or whatever is being done, you're seeing it in a different light. So, I mean, yeah, that's a start, and I think that that's wonderful, but it has to go beyond there because that dialogue, I think that the verbal dialogue and talking about the differences, you know, I think sometimes people get offended when they are asked questions, but you gotta turn that around, and that if someone's asking you a question, they want to know, and the only way they're gonna know, or the only way we're gonna combat the ignorance, is if we ask.
Many people have developed an ignorance towards minorities and people of color without truly understanding the reasoning behind it. Because of this, it has become very easy to judge one another based off of their outward appearance. I believe these judgments are caused by being misinformed or miseducated on the topic of cultural criticism, which leads to creating assumptions and stereotyping others.
Through these interviews, it is easy to observe that while some have faced cultural criticism and others have not, education is viewed as a way to take away the division lines between cultures and to open up discussions about stereotypes and differences. If people can ask questions respectfully and others can receive the questions respectfully, there's a true opportunity to learn about cultural communities and to work towards the end of discrimination. Despite the assessments and judgments made between cultures, criticism exists within. In these cases, the criticism often stems from judgment around those who act differently compared to their culture's stereotypes, or change their lifestyles to fit another culture. In the poem We Wear the Mask by Paul Laurence Dunbar, similar ideas of changing cultures to fit the standards of another are expressed. The quotes "We wear the mask that grins and lies," and "With torn and bleeding hearts we smile" describe how many African Americans changed themselves and their lives to become more like white society through hiding their struggles caused by race. Inside the Black culture evident in America, there is criticism towards people who change themselves to become more white or to fit another culture. This criticism is evident in Between the World and Me, a novel by Ta-Nehisi Coates, an African-American man who wrote the novel as a letter addressing his son. Throughout his work, Coates indicates that the idea of the American dream is only a possibility for white society. He criticizes those of his own race who search out this dream because they are trying to change and be white instead of Black. Coates views those who attempt to change their culture to achieve the dream as dreamers, who through their attempted conversion to another race, another culture, are ignorant of society. By hoping to become part of the dream, Coates believes the dreamers are a part of the social divisions that cause discriminatory acts. I believe criticism within cultures stems from stereotypes. So when it comes to Coates' perspective on the dreamers, I understand and agree with his ideas of abandoning Black culture to be white. However, a person can still express ideas and characteristics of another culture or be involved in a different cultural community without abandoning one culture. Through the stories heard in everyday life to the examples found in literature across time, stereotypes have defined cultures and instigated much of the criticism within or between. While many have different perspectives on the cultural communities in America today, there is no doubt in anyone's mind that discrimination and racism play a large role in life. The real question is, how will we work together to stop these stereotypes, prejudice, and inequality in society?